Good morning. Welcome back to Professional Insights, brought to you by the National Referral Network. We've got a great topic this morning, raising capital. Raising capital can really feel like you're scaling a mountain. A lot of questions, but what if I told you there was a way to make it simpler, smarter, and more accessible than ever before? And so whether you're a business owner looking to fund your dreams, you're looking for capital for expansion, or you're just ready to launch that idea, this episode is for you. We're going to dive into the world of Reg CF and Reg A, two game-changing tools, in my opinion, that are reshaping how companies raise money and how everyday people, which is the key, can invest in businesses that they actually believe in, that they're in line with personality-wise or belief system. So before we get going, hit that like and subscribe button, put any questions you have in there, and we'll make sure we get those answered. But if you're ready to unlock these powerful insights, let's get started. Jon.
Mike.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Jon, let's jump into this thing. So there's a lot of information. I guess here's the disclaimer. Jon and I are not licensed to raise capital. This is for informational purposes only. We got to tell that for compliance purposes. But Jon, share a little bit about your background and how you found yourself working with DealMaker, which is a great technology platform, but a marketing, legal. DealMaker does a lot. How did you get into this?
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, starting from DealMaker, where we're at now, right? Helping companies raise capital online. You know, if you were going to reinvent raising capital today, it probably wouldn't look like going to a handful of people in Silicon Valley and hoping for yeses.
Right.
That's certainly a component of it, but you know, we're thinking about the capital stack differently and bringing retail into that. So enabling companies to raise capital from retail and do it in ways that, you know, if you were to reinvent capital today, how you would do it, right? It would be digital, so you can reach investors and community, right? It would be data driven, right? And it would have some diversity, right? Bringing in different people to your cap stack. How I got here is actually I've been spending, you know, the threads are always easier when you look back at them. So
Right.
This is how I've woven them together. I started off in management consulting. I thought that was the way to help businesses grow. And it only takes a couple big projects at Fortune 500 companies to say, okay, you know, maybe not, this is not how we help businesses grow,
right?
You know, because they're, you know, big, slow moving companies, and that's fine. So left that, got into digital marketing, right? Where it was, oh, you know, hey, here's this wave of digital, right? And it was really around that time of, you know, Facebook figuring out how to do mobile and this rise of e-com that took place because of, you know, mobile meets Facebook and this whole,
Right.
you know, ad economy, right? Of the duopoly of Google and Meta there. So a really interesting time to come up in digital and say, oh, you know, hey, this is how we help companies grow through digital customer acquisition and strategy. And then the world's kind of morphed of, you know, helping people raise capital through digitals. Because, you know, one day called us when we were at this agency and, you know, I always joke we were in the back of this Ethiopian jazz cafe. So, you know, that's where we were working in this garage. So we probably would have said yes to anybody so long as we thought we could do it. But they said, you know, hey, can you help us raise capital? You can do this sort of mass solicitation, right? Which is actually, you know, I didn't know it at the time, part of the Jobs Act, where regulation crowdfunding was part of that, right? Allowing
right. And Jon, what year was that?
Oh, so that was 2017 for me. So 2 years after the Jobs Act, you know, I hadn't even heard of it. And so we'll talk about this more, but it's crazy because, you know, you may have folks that don't realize you can invest in these opportunities. I still have friends that are like, oh, I didn't realize I could invest in private companies, right? So I, you know, it was 2 years after the Jobs Act, didn't even know. And, you know, we said, sure, here's how we would do that to leverage digital customer acquisition to help companies do that, to raise capital online. So we had started, essentially our agency was the performance marketing agency to do that. And in 2022, DealMaker acquired that agency, where DealMaker is the self-hosted online capital raising platform to help companies raise capital online.
So what inspired DealMaker to focus on doing this, to get into this very, 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 very new niche within capital raising that really went against your Wall Street broker dealers? How did DealMaker make that decision to get into this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's Matt and Rebecca's insight, the two co-founders,
Okay.
and their vision. They were capital markets attorneys. So they were doing all of this paperwork, right? And, had this insight of kind of crazy that we're doing this all through paperwork, right? Like, why can't this be online? So their vision meshed really well with that world of Regulation A, Regulation Crowdfunding, so Reg CF and Reg D, to just be able to process that all online, right? And then start to build out the tech that makes that happen, where you can do, KYC and AML behind the scenes and do that compliantly, right? So yeah, that's how those two worlds merged, was their insight into, hey, this should be online.
Well, and it's not that far back, because from 2011 to 2015, actually 2016, I was raising capital through Reg D offerings. And Jon, I was going manually doing OFAC checks, going against Interpol and FBI and CIA and Google searches and all of these things. We had 70 investors that I had to go through, and each one of them take their IDs and go through these systems and manually check to see if they're on some terror watch list.
Yep, exactly.
It was brutal. So, we've come a long way. So for those unfamiliar, Jon, with this process, with the Jobs Act, and I know we can't get into the weeds here because of compliance, but how would you describe Reg CF and Reg A in simple terms?
Yeah, simple terms. Reg CF stands for Regulation Crowdfunding. You can raise up to 5 million from non-accredited investors, right? So retail investors, which really opens up the ability to raise capital for you. And you can solicit those investments that may be reaching out online or running paid media campaigns to do that. There's all sorts of different ways that people accomplish that, but it allows you to raise up to 5 million through in pretty short order, right? To do some of the filings that need to, and again, that's more in the weeds, but it's not as complex as running a Reg A, where the filings change a little bit. So, Reg CF is a great starting point for a lot of companies because it's less cumbersome, right? The sort of disclosures and what you have to put together corresponds to the amount of capital that you can raise, right? Which is, always a thought in the industry of, is it okay to raise from retail investors? Well, it's kind of patronizing to think that you can't, right? That retail investors aren't informed, but the disclosures align with that, where, Reg CF's a little easier, faster to get off the ground. The Reg A, where you can raise up to 75 million, requires more paperwork, but Reg CF's a great starting point for people.
And to understand this, and just to be clear for those that are watching, the retail investor is basically you and I.
Yeah.
And the idea that non-accredited investors are not sophisticated. There are a lot of people that are watching this that are out there in the world that are very sophisticated when it comes to money, but they're not considered an accredited investor. So they can't participate in a lot of these opportunities that for the longest time have never been available to us. And we'll call it the 99 percenters, right?
Yep.
So with that said, Jon, how has the technology from DealMaker's platform changed the way that not only businesses raise capital, but also for, like, say, you and I to invest in companies that we're more aligned with in terms of our belief system?
Yeah. Well, I'll give an example of a company raising capital this way, and then I'll flip it back over to the retail investor alignment for folks like you and I, right? But the Oakland Ballers is a really great example. So a sports league we just helped raise capital for, or a sports team in the Patriot League. They're out in Oakland, right?
Real quick, Jon, I read that and it blew my mind.
Oh, great. I'd love to hear that.
It blew my mind simply because, one, I'm from Northern California. I grew up watching the A's.
Nice.
I had no idea that there was even one, whatever Patriot League that you're talking about. Two, I didn't even know that this team existed. And three, when I listened to their story, which I don't mean to cut you off here, but their story was, we wanted to raise some money and we had a lot of people come to our game. So we thought, hey, would you guys want to be owners of this team? And they had such a response to that. So go ahead, tell the rest.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you heard it, because that ties into the benefits of raising capital this way, it's also brand awareness, right? When you get out there and say, hey, we're raising capital, it opens up you to, initial communities that you may already be tied to, like the Oakland Ballers, or when we do it for clean tech companies, people really wanting to be involved in investing in the companies that are literally shaping the future. So that's what we see in the clean tech. So it's just such a great way to bring those communities into the fold. For the Oakland Ballers in particular, the founders are successful in tech, right? They had access to other capital, so they raised some debt, they raised some venture, but they also wanted to raise a community round to, bring that fan-led investment into them. So that's where we think about the retail capital stack, or the capital stack changing when you add in retail, right? There's debt, there's venture, and then they put in retail capital on top of that, which is really powerful. So, companies come to it arrive at it for different reasons, but the Oakland Ballers is a really great one of just very clearly, why not let your fans get in there? Now they have a fan bill of rights. It's so cool. It's super cool. And I think we're going to see a lot more companies do that sort of thing, because they understand the power of the consumer and the retail investor, and this sort of like groundswell, of getting involved in the company.
I think this is important, Jon, because it's what the Jobs Act did, especially with Reg CF and Reg A, is it literally opened the door. To your point, it opened the door for this opportunity to people that like the team.
Yep.
Right? Everybody knows about the ownership. What is it? The Green Bay Packers, that the ownership is part of the community. People have heard about that for years, and they just didn't know how to do it. And what the Oakland Ballers did is literally open the door to every fan that walked in there and give them an opportunity to not only participate in the game, but now, to your point, you've got brand recognition, you've got brand loyalty. I am an owner of this team.
Exactly.
I don't know of a more powerful story than that.
Certainly. Yeah. So I'm glad you brought up the Packers, because that's another great one that DealMaker powered, right? Where the underlying technology behind that. There's a great quote from somebody on Reddit who's an investor, a shareholder in the Packers, and says, I own a lot of stocks. This is the only one that's on my wall, which is super cool, right? And it's true.
It's way cool.
Yeah, it brings a whole new meaning to the cheeseheads.
It really does, and
it's great. It's great for the consumer, right? Because they didn't have those opportunities before, the retail investor, right? And it's important to get them involved in that. I hope we see more of it in sports, particularly around the privatization of sports that's happening both at a professional and college league. Collegiate level. It's going to be really interesting to see how that unfolds, and them getting their fans involved to be investors.
Right. And so with something like the Oakland Ballers, why is this type of framework so important for small businesses and startups to be able to go out and raise that money?
Well, capital is the lifeblood of any business, and you need to be able to raise it from a diverse mix, right? That could be debt, that could be venture, right? And it should also be, direct to investor, right? The sort of, crowdfunding from retail investors. It's important to have that mix so that companies have options. And if you can lean into one because it's more beneficial for you, then great. We have companies that we work with, that we power, that, are institutional backed, right? But others that have just solely relied on retail investors to continue to fund the company. And it's been really powerful for them because, the terms of that raise, where, they own more of the company than they would otherwise if you get sort of elbow driven by, a institutional investor,
right?
But also an ongoing source of capital, right? So, there's a company that we've worked with, Death & Co., these just beautiful bars that they have, right? And they're able to, as they launch new locations, right, to be able to continue to raise capital off that model, where their investors say, can continue to invest in that. So you create this asset class that you can tap back into. So again, it's more about having the appropriate options for companies and startups to power their business, because capital is the lifeblood of that. And, whatever sort of mix that stack takes shape should be just best suited for their business, and retail being part of that is an important function, because not everybody should only rely on venture capital to make sure their business succeeds.
So coming from the investment banking side a long, long time ago, one of the questions I always got asked from clients, because you mentioned the cap table and these different kind of aspects of a cap table, which we won't get into a cap table, but really it's just how the investors lay out. One of the questions I always got was like, what do I offer investors? Is there a framework, Jon? And I know that this is kind of getting into a little bit into the compliance side because not every deal is the same. But is there somewhat, how does a company go to market and entice the investor to put money into it? Is there a kind of a framework to that?
Yeah, specifically in terms of valuation, the framework for testing the waters was just updated. And testing the waters is almost exactly like it sounds. It's not literal. You're not getting in the water, but you're allowed to get out there and, gauge interest, right? Take
Right.
indications of interest. And you can now do that in a way that includes the terms of the offering, right? So you could say, hey, we're going to go out at a $30 million valuation. I wonder if people are interested in that, right? So it allows you to gauge that in that testing the waters phase, which we didn't talk about earlier, but it is the precursor to, for some companies, of running a Reg CF, right? Or running your Reg A to collect indications of interest for that. So that's a good way to gauge that interest before you go to market to understand, is there retail appetite for this?
Understood. And so what are some of the common myths or misunderstanding entrepreneurs have about using Reg CF and Reg A?
Yeah, I would say, when it started, there were companies that, may have been doing it as a last resort, and that, people need what they need to run their business, right?
Right.
So the caliber of company, people see it as a last resort. I'll just say it explicitly, where they shouldn't. And that mindset is changing, particularly as, companies go public doing this. We have, several companies that are listed on the NASDAQ or NYSE now, where their first rounds were equity crowdfunding rounds. So we're seeing the industry mature, where now innovative founders don't look at it as a last resort. They look at it because they are innovative and want to tap into retail, right? And bring them along for the ride. So that's one of those misconceptions that's continuing to be kind of washed out as companies mature in the space. So yeah, I think that's a big misconception about it.
What about the misconception of the traditional VC, private equity, the broker dealers that, look, I pick on CPAs a lot, and I'm going to pick on the investment bankers right now, because this is obviously a threat to them, right? They're not getting the very large fees, the due diligence fees, the filing fees. They're not getting paid if these companies are doing Reg CF and Reg A on their own. So how does a company bridge that gap and kind of get the right information to really make an educated decision? Is this right for me, or do I do a Reg D?
Yeah. Well, we do see a lot of people doing both. A lot of
Right.
companies that we've raised capital for do have institutional investors on their cap stack, which we think is really powerful, right? And I think the traditional stakeholders will continue to come around to the power of retail, right? If you look at the public markets, I think Tesla has, north of 40% retail ownership. And it's undeniable that that's powerful, right? Because the community that is involved in that and how sort of fervent they are, right? Like that's a really powerful groundswell of energy. So we're hoping that more traditional stakeholders just see the value in bringing in retail into that. Although in the short term, it may be a loss of some fees, but we think that retail power in the capital stack will make it more valuable over the long run. And it's also the right way to do it because it's more inclusive. Did that answer that question?
It's a tough road, right? Because people don't like change.
Exactly.
Right. Especially those, and I don't mean to use the word power because broker dealers don't have power necessarily, but the ones that have dominated the capital raising environment for the longest of times, they don't like change either. And it's an old school way of doing things. And really the Reg CF and Reg A has only been around for what, 8 years now?
Yeah.
Right. Where capital raising has been around for a long, long time. And it's been reserved for that higher echelon individual. And now it's not. And people don't necessarily like that either. And so on the other side of that, Jon, like just out of curiosity, what type of businesses benefit or could benefit from pursuing a Reg CF, Reg A? I mean, you talked about the Oakland Ballers, which is just an obscure baseball team in Oakland. But what other types of businesses benefit from raising money like this?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because, it's not right for everyone, right? I wish everybody could raise capital through this
Right.
process. It's typically best suited for the companies and industries that have followings, and they don't have to be your direct following, right? Like the Oakland Ballers is a great example because they had this fan base to tap into. So some companies have that already, right? There's some great e-commerce brands like, you look at Liquid Death, right? They have this crazy following that, they'd have a lot of fun making them shareholders, right?
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, not everybody's Liquid Death, not everybody's like the Oakland Ballers with this fan base to tap into. We see the companies that perform best are currently attractive to retail investors already and kind of have a proclivity to communities already. So, we just ran a raise for a company in clean tech, a lithium extraction company, right? And they raised $75 million because they have such fervent people out there who didn't know about that company already. Like they weren't, on the email list, but they said, oh, we want to invest in clean tech, right? So companies and industries that's kind of aligned to where communities exist already, right? We do really well in robotics and AI too, because, people want to be part of that investment trajectory in these industries that before they didn't have access to, particularly as we've seen companies stay private longer, where a lot of those, returns get eaten up in that private life cycle, right?
Right.
You look at somebody like Stripe, who's, if they go public, how much more is there to gain in that? So we see a lot of industries where retail investor appetite already exists, and they want to, be able to get in at the private stage of that company. So theoretically, they have more upside.
So what does the investment look like, Jon? I know every company's different, but I've seen companies as low as $250. But talk a little bit about that. Like, where do you see that range? Because I know a lot of people are like, well, I can't, like, is it 10,000? So how can somebody get, as an entry point, get into an investment like this?
Yeah. They're very often for as low as $100,
Oh,
$250.
wow.
Yeah, the company will set the terms, and we, finding those terms is just a mix of what you think is right for your community and investor base. The Oakland Ballers went live with theirs at, I think, 520 because that's the area code of Oakland or something like that. But they wanted,
I love it.
yeah, it's
Good for
great.
them.
But they also wanted to keep it low, right, to make it accessible to everybody, right?
Yeah, but one of the things I've heard though, Jon, is that, Reg CF and Reg A, and maybe Reg CF is more true than Reg A because it's a larger dollar amount. But one of the concerns that I've heard just from individuals is that you're not going to get the large check writers. Now, I don't know how they define large check writers, but I would assume that six-figure check writer. Do you see some of these projects, although the minimum might be 250, 150, do you see these projects getting larger check writers?
Yeah, certainly. So on average, it's actually around $2,200, right? Which,
Oh, wow.
for somebody talking about, large check writer, they're probably, talking, six figures. But we do see those check writers as well, right? And that's the beauty of the digital investment process, right? Where, our alarm bells start ringing, when somebody throws in 100K, 500K, and we've seen investments amount of that size. But that's the beauty of this digital interaction where that investor was targeted and nurtured and can, jump on a webinar with that company. So facilitating this sort of digital deal room where companies are able to, first attract that sort of investor and then have a digital process that helps that person invest and, meet with the company and that sort of thing. So yeah, we do see those sort of large checks come into companies, but the majority of them are around that average of 2,200.
That's interesting. So for entrepreneurs feeling overwhelmed, not only by this conversation, hopefully this has kind of eliminated that, but the overall environment in raising capital, Jon, what advice would you give them to help them take that first step?
Yeah. Well, it's hard, right? And that's part of why we do this at DealMaker to support companies in their capital raising journey, right? I would say keep your options open, right? SBA loans, debt, venture, right? Community capital or equity crowdfunding, right? It's important to have the sort of quiver of arrows, so to speak, to go about your business and be able to do that. For any founder, whether they use DealMaker or not, we're all in this together in terms of the startup ecosystem. So it's hard, but keep your options open, and that's the beauty of the capital stack that I'm talking about, where people should leverage every tool at their disposal.
And then what do you see coming down the pipe in the new year and the years to come? Not only just raising capital, but what does DealMaker see in the next future with these type of vehicles, Reg CF and Reg A?
Yeah, I think I had mentioned this earlier. It's going to play a big role in the future of sports, right? Particularly at the collegiate level, as we see the privatization of those companies, and it's going to be really exciting because I think that'll also get it into the zeitgeist more. That's the beauty of sports. It's this sort of cross culture,
Right.
into the zeitgeist. It's got a strong business overlap. I think we're going to see a lot of that in sports. And just honestly, more retail investors understand that they can gain access to these. And the best way to do that is actually on the back of those, the big brand names raising capital this way to help educate the market that, yes, you can access private company investments doing this. So we hope that sports continues to be a catalyst for that, so that, folks like your clients know that, these things are also on the table for them to be able to access these private investments that were previously exclusive.
And maybe the next conversation, and this may or may not be with you guys, but the idea of using self-directed IRAs or self-directed Roth IRAs to participate in some of these things. And so maybe we'll get into that, but I want to be cognizant of your time. I know I could go on and on about this.
I feel like we were just getting started.
Right?
I agree. The IRA is an important function of, how that capital gets into those companies. So, something that, your clientele would really benefit from.
So maybe, maybe this is a conversation for say somebody like you, and then somebody from Madison Trust, who we often use, or at least I often use for self-directed, and see what that synergy may look like for clients. So maybe we just came up with another topic, Jon. I don't know.
Hey,
right?
This is how the sausage gets made. So Mike, it's been a blast to have you to be on with you. So thanks for having me. The time flew by. I hope this was valuable to your folks. I'm always happy to come back.
Absolutely. So Jon's the DealMaker. I'll put the link below. Reach out to DealMaker if you have any questions. If you need a personal introduction, please leave it in the comments. I'm happy to make the personal introduction to Jon, and he can get you pointed in the right direction within DealMaker. But yes, thank you, Jon. I appreciate the time, and I'll get you back on, and we'll have some more conversations about this.
That sounds great, Mike. Thanks again. It was a pleasure. Happy holidays. I'll talk to you soon.
You too. Bye.